We are going to talk to the Secretary of Planning and Housing, Kiersten Fishburn. Welcome to the stage. Trudi Mayers, Deputy Sec from Transport for New South Wales, and Tom Gellibrand, the New South Wales Infrastructure Coordinator General and also Chief Executive of Infrastructure New South Wales. Welcome, everyone. You've all been briefed. You know that this is the opportunity for Q&A with the audience. So for those that haven't logged into Slido, there is a QR code on your table. Feel free to do that now, and I'll get the ball rolling while you guys log in, and I'll get to some questions from the floor very shortly. But you guys are all familiar with southwestern Sydney. Obviously, you've got some background there, Kiersten in particular with Liverpool, and Trudi, it's a bit of a homecoming for you in Campbelltown. I understand you spent a bit of your misspent youth here in this very building.
I haven't been at the Catholic Club in the morning so much, so it's nice to come here early.
That's what you say, Trudi. That's what you say.
I'm glad they let you off the ban list, and they let you into that because you're an important part of the conversation. Kiersten, I'll start with you. It's been over 12 months now since the government, through the Premier, emphasised the housing crisis and the policy focus and the focus that the government was going to take on delivering homes with a large chunk in Western Sydney. The key message and the signal that was sent, last year was around up more so than out. And I think most people understood the logic and rationale behind that. I think it's fair to say there's probably a bit more of a nuanced position now and a little less prescriptive around the out part of it. Having heard the Minister there talk about greenfield development, what's the department and your team's approach to how it considers, assesses and plans for greenfield developments in southwestern Sydney?
Thanks, Adam. That's a really great question. And a lot of the messaging around up, not out, is about making sure that all areas of Sydney do the heavy lifting in relation to the density piece and housing supply. As you will have heard from the Minister, we are well and truly aware that Western Sydney and Southwest Sydney has done that lifting for everybody else for a long period of time. That's led to a lack of balance across the whole of Sydney and probably is a contributing factor to the housing affordability piece as well. So there are very good reasons for that density piece to bring into play, but in no way does that mean that greenfields don't still have a role. They've got a role for a number of reasons. Firstly, diversity of housing is absolutely critical, and if we look at one of the challenges we have, it's not just a supply side challenge, that is a real issue, but it is also a diversity piece as well. So we have people, particularly older people, living in homes that are 3-4 bedrooms when they probably only require 1 or 2. They're not doing that to be disruptive. They're doing that because there isn't the housing supply piece that they would be able to downsize into available in the market at the moment. We've got a situation where we're pretty good at apartments. We're really good at detached housing, and we do some beautiful examples out in southwestern Sydney that we've seen, some really, really quality design coming out here. We don't really do things in Sydney in that middle piece at all. And that's something that we want to see not just in eastern Sydney, but in the Greenfields area as well. How do we make sure we get that diversity of housing into southwestern Sydney so there is optionality, so that you can have your detached home if you want it, but you can also have your terrace, you can also have your apartment living as well. And there are some great examples of that occurring now, and that's where we want to see that transitional thinking to bring in that diversity piece. That's about sweating the infrastructure, of course, because you're able to create a greater density, but it's also providing that optionality for people who really want to live in southwestern Sydney. They might not be able to afford their first detached home, but an apartment would be a really great outcome. And I know particularly Campbelltown Council has done some really smart thinking about that density piece around their transport nodes as well. So greenfields remain absolutely part of the housing supply piece. We're not going to get to our housing targets unless we sweat that greenfields as well. The Minister would have detailed that southwestern Sydney is really doing the heavy lifting over that 5-year period, but the future for greenfields looks at how do we make sure we do lineal planning around where our transport nodes are, and how do we make sure we've got an eye on that diversity of housing supply for southwestern Sydney as well.
On the infrastructure front, I might throw to you, Tom, while the Slido questions start to filter through. A lot of expectation around your role and what it's going to mean for supply and infrastructure provision. For those that aren't aware, what's your message to the audience in terms of what your role is going to be, and how do you see it sort of integrating with the other departments?
Thanks for that question. In terms of other departments, it's working closely with them and to facilitate joined up activities throughout the planning and development process. That's key to coordinated planning and delivery. I think in terms of a priority for me is, and the Minister mentioned it, I think Chris Brown mentioned it, there is, and everyone out in the audience knows it, we're in a fiscally constrained environment. There is a finite amount of money available. So, okay, where do you want me to spend it? And if I asked everyone individually here, there'd be a degree of consensus, but it'd be fairly small. Most people say over there, over here, over there, I want a road, I want a bridge, I want a rail, So you can't do everything everywhere all at once. It's a great title for a movie, but it's not a good way of planning or developing a city. So my job is to really, really focus on what the next 5 years looks like in terms of what sort of infrastructure we can deliver to make sure that there's equity in the way people enjoy the city. And if you look at South West Sydney, at the moment, there's inequity in terms of access to the emerging Aerotropolis. So that's going to be a great place. In fact, if you get excited enough, the Aerotropolis will be one of the most significant economic areas of Australia. People go, well, that's a big call. And you think, okay, well, let's just think about Adelaide for a sec, right? We've done that, right? But if you think about the Aerotropolis, it's going to attract the most significant forms of new employment and investment, and it will be developed over many, many years. It's got great access to Penrith. It's got, thanks to Trudi and transport, you've got M4s, you've got M8s, you've got M7s, you've got M12s, you've got Northern Road. There is substantial investments that have already been made. Sydney Water with the South Creek Advanced Water Treatment Plant. There's a whole lot of money that's already gone in there, which is terrific for if you live in Penrith, if you live in the east, and potentially people in the north, in Blacktown. There's a few issues there. But if you're talking about the southwest, it's fairly disconnected. All the roads are rural. They're all got very limited capacity. Intersections are at capacity, blah, 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 blah. So my focus is really to make sure that there's equitable access into the Aerotropolis and working with Trudi really closely, especially because there's a couple of key pieces of road infrastructure that we need to get on with. Not the planning and business case part of the business, actually building things and putting money into tarmac and intersections. So Trudi and I probably meet more with each other than we do with people in our own organisations at the moment. And our focus is just to see how fast we can get money out the door to do some sensible upgrades. And we're talking about Badgerys Creek Road, 15th Avenue, Elizabeth Drive. I know there's a couple of other roads that are in there, Narellan and a few others that get much closer into the southwest sector. And they're also emerging as important investments.
It's probably a nice segue to you, Trudi. You had a bit of a win last budget, bit of money there, probably not as much as you would have liked. How is Transport prioritising some of these projects, and what do you see as the sort of the pivotal ones and the ones that are sort of next in line?
Yeah, thank you. So I think we were really thrilled to see Southwest money in the budget as well. So I don't think I've seen a Southwest roads package announced in the budget for some time, but I don't know if it's clear in there. So for the room, it's Cow Pasture Road, Menangle Road, Camden Valley Way and Hume. It is planning work, but we need the planning work to be able to look at what we need for the future. So obviously that and the South West Rail business cases for extensions from Bradfield, Leppington, Glenfield and then into Macarthur. So we're really pleased that we've got good development funding for the South West at the moment. We do think that the model that we use for Aero worked pretty well. We worked with councils, we worked with developers, we worked with industry and stakeholders, and we came up with a prioritised plan, which is essentially what I need to hand to Tom. So we are doing the same for for the Southwest. We launched today the Outer Southwest Integrated Transport Plan. We're setting that up predominantly with Camden, Campbelltown and Wallandilly councils, who've been really supportive and patient as we've got ready to launch that, but we'll pivot the Aero team to do that work. And it's not just about big road infrastructure. This is about active transport links, how we can connect places, how we can look at Campbelltown CBD revitalisation and what the councils need as well. But we'll have the priorities ready, and then we can battle it out with everyone about which order they go in.
So that is a pretty big announcement, hot off the press there for anyone in the room. Talk us through what that team is essentially going to be doing, because from what I've heard from yourself and the team is that is going to be basically a focused team looking at Southwest transport connections.
Yeah, 100%. So dedicated team working to get the feedback from communities, but also looking at our development work and business cases, and then really putting those in a priority order for the short term, but also for the long-term vision for the Southwest. It will include freight, it will include road access to Aero, it will include local connections. It really is a bit of a catch-all for everything with that dedicated team.
Right. Yeah. Well, the questions are coming through thick and fast. I'm not going to be able to probably get to all of them, but I will start with this one. What measures are being taken within each department to encourage private sector investment in housing, transport and infrastructure projects? Who wants to start with that?
I'm happy to start with that. I mean, in planning, of course, 90% of all housing stock is delivered by the private sector, 90 to 95%, depending on where we are in the cycle. The state obviously has a role, but we rely on the private sector in New South Wales and indeed in Australia for the delivery of housing. So it's critical that the department is open, willing and engaged with the private sector to understand what the inhibiting factors are, but also to support development. There are two absolutely critical things for any developer, and they are time and certainty. Certainty, I think we've gone a long way in the department with the TODs to clearly signal, as the Minister detailed, not just the next 5 years of development, but probably the 10, 15, possibly even 20-year horizon of development in Sydney. So we've been quite prescriptive about our expectations about where we will see that development horizon. I think that certainty is critical. If I look back on the last couple of decades of planning in Sydney, chopping and changing is absolutely the worst thing that can possibly occur, particularly as infrastructure has a lot longer lead time than a planning approval does, despite the fact people will accuse us of slow planning approvals. It actually takes longer to build a road than to get a DA out the door. So that certainty is critical for agencies and developers. The other thing, of course, is time. And the Minister talked about the fact that the department is now focused not just on the time it takes to get the DA done, right, which used to be we get the DA approved or the PP approved and our job's done, walk away, the department's done their job. The Minister charged me when I came in with completely changing that culture and having a department that is focused on what is the end result of getting somebody in a home, a key in the door. So looking at how we can reduce the elements of time. I can't change the fact that construction costs are very high at the moment and labour costs are very high, but what I can do is attempt to reduce holding costs for the development industry and use that as the option to try and bring in some financial support there. Finally, in terms of an open door, and I think Chris asked the Minister about this as well, there are many opportunities in government at the moment for industry to engage with us. I'm going to call out Bradfield because it is one of my areas in my department and in the Minister's department as well. That is an area where we want to see the industry of the future come. We want people to be there. So particularly southwestern Sydney and indeed I will say Wollongong, even though it's the boss's area. We see that as the employment opportunity for the southwest and for the Illawarra as well. So our door is open. We want to speak to industry about engaging and coming to locate, if not in Bradfield, in southwestern Sydney, and we can help facilitate those relationships.
Can I just add, I think that's really important, Kiersten. We need to get out there publicly and talk about what will be delivered, but also what won't, or what order the priority is. And that's why Tom's role will be so important in us being able to do that, because then we can work with the industry even more. That's where the works in kind can kick in. When we're in detailed design, you know we're ready. But if you know that it's not coming for a while, then there's other options we can talk to industry about.
And Trudi, I think it's fair to say that there's an openness in relation to discussing works in kind that I suspect the development industry has not seen previously. Certainly the department, I've always been positive, proactive in engaging on works in kind, but I'm seeing other agencies who previously probably closed the door, I think is fair to say, being willing to have those WIC discussions. So that's a big shift.
On the topic of the Aerotropolis, there's a question here for you, Tom, around how do you ensure the existing centres outside of the Aerotropolis, their productivity isn't undermined or compromised by the government's investment in Bradfield and the Aerotropolis?
It's probably whoever asks the question is probably going to get disappointed with the answer. I'm probably not. That's definitely not my focus. My focus is to make sure that, as I said before, that southwestern Sydney is connected into the Aerotropolis and all the opportunities that will go through to that area with road access, bus access, and also work with Trudi in terms of making sure that the analysis for the metro extensions are, progress as quickly as possible, and the government can make a decision on investing in rail in this area. But in terms of looking at other sectors, other centres, I assume you're talking about Penrith, Blacktown, Campbelltown, to make sure they're not being cannibalised. I don't think they would be, but that's more a question for Kiersten. But my focus is really to make sure that southwest Sydney is well connected into the Aerotropolis. I'm also involved in housing more generally across Sydney in Greenfield and Brownfield, and INSW is working with a number of agencies to assist with energy transition. So there's a whole host of other things we're doing in terms of infrastructure around the state. But in terms of Aerotropolis and Western Sydney, just to be clear, our real focus is making sure that everyone's got a good, equitable access to the benefits that will come from what will, as I said before, be a nationally significant economic area.
Kiersten?
Yeah, can I just pick up a little bit of that? Having been the passionate advocate for Liverpool, right? I'm really aware of the risks and the perceptions that Bradfield could cannibalise. From my perception, that's a failure if that occurs. What we want to see in Bradfield is additionality. So businesses who might be an international business who don't have a foothold in New South Wales presently coming into Bradfield, so that we're actually adding to the economic benefit rather than taking from existing centres. We've also worked really significantly with the parks, who are the collective of the 8 Western Sydney councils through the Western Sydney City Deal, to develop an economic strategy that is about a regional economic benefit, not just an Aerotropolis benefit. And when the new CEO of what is now the Bradfield Development Authority was Western Parkland City Authority, Ken Morrison, commences in about a week and a half. Part of his role is not just the development of Bradfield, it's that economic activation with the councils across the whole region as well. So it's a question that should be asked of us all the time, because it's a very critical question. But I can give you my assurance it's one that we're very alive to, and we will continue to make sure we keep an eye on as well.
Adam, just to add, if you reflect on the existing centres of Liverpool and Penrith and Blacktown and Campbelltown, they're going to play a very, very different and extraordinarily valuable role in the community compared to the Aerotropolis. The sorts of development that has started happening out of the Aerotropolis and will continue to do so is just enormous sheds full of logistics and freight, and that will employ a lot of people and provide a lot of benefits to Western Sydney. But there won't be courthouses, there won't be schools, or many schools out there, because it is chiefly large-scale employment precincts. The services that people can and should enjoy in places like Campbelltown and Blacktown are high-order services of solicitors and lawyers and medical practices and hospitals and all those sorts of things. That will continue in those centres, but Bradfield and the Aerotropolis is a very different proposition altogether. So I don't think people should be fearful that there's going to be a competition. It's more a complementary role that will provide increased prosperity and a whole lot of different employment choices.
I do think there's a lot of opportunities for those centres to leverage what's happening at Aerotropolis and Bradfield. Got a question from Marty McFly, who's back from the future and in Campbelltown today. Will we see, or is it a good idea to have a league table of priority infrastructure investment in the southwest? Who wants to take that?
Well, it's almost, as I mentioned before, that my focus is going to be on the next 5 years, and people say we should be more visionary than that. I think we've got enough vision documents out there. I think the department's done a whole lot of good work on the Aerotropolis. The blueprint's there. We know what's going to happen. Sure, there's more work to be done, but that shouldn't be the focus. If we keep just focusing on that, we won't get infrastructure in the ground. So I want to focus on the next 5 years. We've promised the Premier that we'll deliver what we're calling a sector plan, and the sector plan will leverage the land use planning that's already done, so this is the land use, and then work with agencies like Sydney Water, which is foundation infrastructure for this area, and transport especially, and say, okay, these are the current investments on roads that will be happening between now and over the next 5 years. So if you're a developer or a landowner, you'll know what areas are being serviced, and you can start making decisions around divestment, sales, DAs, what have you. And that 5-year focus will really really provide useful information to the market. And then you can look beyond that, which we'll identify, but the dates become vaguer as you move forward. But for the next 5 years, we really want to clarify what's going on, who's doing what and when.
One of the themes for today, and we'll hear about it a bit later, is around sustainable development, making sure that the environment and the areas around southwestern Sydney are protected, maintained, leveraged where possible. A couple of questions here that relate to that. Extreme heat costs, Western Sydney, $1.5 billion today, $6 billion by 2050. How does infrastructure development address public health issues and heat impacts? What are we doing to enable more focus on the blue and green grids in southwestern Sydney? Kiersten?
So acutely aware of how hot it can get out in the west. It feels like, your eyeballs are boiling when I used to walk down the mall in Liverpool in January. So a few things there. Firstly, the government has introduced basic standards for new development, with which that is the greenfields developments that we see out here. That was a very bold and ambitious move by the government, I have to say. The minister was the only minister across all states and territories who stuck to his ground and released those, and part of the reason for that was because we understand it is hot and it is only going to get hotter. So those basic standards ensure that houses are better insulated and designed in new builds to manage heat-related issues. Another piece of very significant work that has occurred for the southwest has been the release of the Cumberland Plain Conservation Plan. This is the first of its kind in New South Wales, where instead of having each DA having to look at biodiversity in isolation, we have looked at the whole region and determined what are the biodiversity offsets and where are the essentially go, no-go zones in relation to protecting that area as well. That's a really significant piece of work that we want to see replicated as much as we can across Sydney, because it gives development certainty, but it also gives environment certainty. We know that we will be able to protect these lands because we're pre-planning it. We're not doing it piecemeal by piecemeal. The third thing as well is, of course, the blue-green grid and planning for that, particularly within the Aerotropolis where we have our beautiful creek system. Sydney Water have done some really significant thinking about how they manage stormwater and do that in a way that protects the creek system as well. So bringing that to life will be part of the work that Tom will obviously be focusing on, and we will continue to be developing that piece of work as well. I know in Bradfield, I'm really proud that part of what we are planning there is for heat mitigation through significant canopy cover and a new park that will really cool the area down, and hopefully that will start to set the benchmark for some of that as well. And I can see, I know Walker's is here, I can see Walker, some of the work that I'm seeing coming out of new development proposals, and we have 4 very big ones at play in southwest Sydney, that environmental standards and management of heat is actually at the first order of thinking that has been going into recent development as well. So I feel confident that while it is a challenge, and I'm not going to in any way not pretend that heat is a challenge out here, there is a real shift in how we are doing things in relation to making sure the planning is done early rather than later, and a commitment from councils and the development community to prioritise this as absolutely number one for the health and well-being of people of the South West.
Great. I'll try and squeeze in a couple more before we have to wrap things up. Question there, and I think refers to a couple of the new rail links that I mentioned up front. Metro extensions potentially to Glenfield and beyond. Question here is, with business cases underway for some of these projects, how transparent and consultative will these processes be?
Yeah, good question. We've heard loud and clear that our stakeholders would like to be more involved as we're in iterating and optioneering and developing, and that new integrated transport plan will include the development phase of business cases. So absolute engagement. We are looking at how we can change our processes to do that. Tom and I have talked about that already, and the need to bring councils in who know their communities best early in the business case stage. So we are looking at the processes, but we'll use this new way of working through the integrated transport plan teams to actually do that engagement.
Beyond the coordination and communication between your departments, one of the key questions here is around how do we work with our utilities such as Sydney Water to assist industry to meet some of these housing objectives? For all of you, I think.
I'll try and answer that really quickly. The Premier recently announced a new I'm laughing before I've even said the word, a committee, which a lot of people get very unexcited by, but it's not very often that government sets up new cabinet committees. So they're establishing a housing committee, and they'll address all of the issues that Kiersten's talking about, supply, everything. And that's supported by a committee that's run in the Cabinet Office that looks at housing policy, housing reform and a whole lot of things. And then on the other side is a committee that I'll run called the Central Infrastructure Coordination Committee. And I'm happy to say that Sydney Water's will be a member of that committee. And having agencies like Sydney Water and other transport and other service providers and utilities in government in that committee eliminates the distance that sometimes occurs between agencies. And when there is a distance, Kiersten might be consulting on a new plan, a new release area, a new growth sector. Unless you keep the agencies really, really close throughout that, you can get to the end of the process and you've got some divergence. The divergence could be in terms of timing, or it could be in terms of some sort of spatial element. And that's when things start to, get a little bit off the rails. The new arrangements that the government have announced in terms of a housing committee will help eliminate the distance between agencies and give a much clearer picture to government than perhaps has happened over about the last 10 years. It's almost a return to the future, because there's a gentleman up the back who I used to work for, lovely man, Angus Dawson, and he worked for he ran an organisation called Growth Centres Commission, and during that period of time, and that was a few years ago, but it was a particular point in time where the distance between agencies, planning agencies and delivery agencies, was actually really, really small, and there was good evidence of infrastructure progressing really well with development. It wasn't always perfect, but it was really good. I think going back to that time when the distances between agencies are either eliminated or really limited, will be crucial if we're going to get the infrastructure happening in the right places at the right time.
Can I add as well? We are hearing all the time, and all the themes in these events are that you all want confidence in our collaboration, and I can't tell you a meeting I'm not in with DeFi or INSW or Sydney Water or other utilities providers. So we are together regularly, and when I talk about a transport plan, they're all just there. It is actually just part of how we do business now, and you should see that more if you're not seeing it already. So I, from Transport, can say I have complete confidence that we are collaborating.
Kiersten?
I was just going to add as well in relation to that collaboration piece too. A really good example of that, I think, is the quarterly meeting that we do with the 8 Western Sydney councils, which is co-chaired from state government's perspective between myself and Josh Murray as Secretary of Transport, and then of course obviously the 8 general managers as well, and the Commonwealth also attends that meeting at a Deputy Secretary level too. And that, I think, is a really great example. I have to be honest, and Trudi, I'm sure you probably, to see a Secretary of Transport and a Secretary of Planning sitting with 8 councils on a quarterly basis on a completely equal relationship, just having a Secretary of Transport and a Secretary of Planning in a room together was not something that was normalised for a long period of time. And I think that's a really good example. And it takes a while for these things to bear fruit, but I've certainly seen a real shift in attitude, and I think that's starting to play out in things, from at least from my department's perspective, more consistency in advice and approvals, a better understanding of where we're able to operate and in terms of what we need to do to make things happen faster. So I think there's some real positives there.
Guys, I think we're out of time. For all the audience that have put through questions, thank you. There's a lot here. If it's okay with you guys, I'm happy to share them with your officers. Yeah, we'll try to get some answers back to you. And on the engagement side, not just the collaboration that's occurring within government, but we're seeing it as well as an industry stakeholder, the level of communication and ongoing engagement and feedback has been really stark over the last 12 months. So thank you all for your continued honesty and transparency and certainty. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.